Good afternoon, everyone. Maybe allow some folks to settle. So Gal asked me to talk about food and nutrition and health, but rather than giving you a really broad overview of those policies, I thought I'd make it a little more specific. And so I chose the SNAP work requirements topic because I think it's a timely topic given the new regulations that will come out from the debt ceiling limit, which I'll discuss in a few minutes. So I thought this would be more useful to some of you, especially if you're looking for research topics given exogenous policy changes. So this is about SNAP work requirements. I'm by no means an expert of this, and I guess one of the reasons I chose this is to learn more about this as well. I want to acknowledge the help of my PhD student who's here, Xiaohan. Where are you, Xiaohan? Okay, there she is. Xiaohan's going to be graduating in a year or so, maybe, or a couple of years. So if you're looking for a good assistant professor, that's a plug-in, right? So I want to talk about background, data, methods, these work requirement effects. So let me start with SNAP. I think all of you are familiar with SNAP, so I'm not going to talk about this extensively. But as you all know, it's by far the largest food assistance program for low-income U.S. households in the U.S. It's means-tested, so it's an entitlement program, right? But states are really responsible for determining the eligibility. As many of you know, there's this list of eligibility requirements, 130% of federal poverty line in terms of gross income. Net income should be less than 100% of the federal poverty line. And households without a member age 60 and above or who has a disability must have assets of a certain amount, 4,250 or less. Then you have the BBCE. We're doing currently some work on this as well, on the impact of BBCE on SNAP outcome measures. But I really want to focus today on SNAP and the work requirements. SNAP, as you all know, is by design an automatic stabilizer. So they expand and contract when economic conditions obviously vary. By design, it's an automatic stabilizer. Right? So it's a very important program, right? I want to talk about this ABOD, which is the able-bodied adults without dependents, because this is really the focus of the SNAP time requirement, they call it. So it's limited, the old one is limited to aged 18 to 49, physically, mentally able-bodied adults for work, and not having dependent children under 18 and other dependents living with them. Okay, so that's the ABOD. But as I've mentioned, there's the debt ceiling limit that was agreed upon, I think it was last month, raised this age threshold, if you will, to, I think, 54. Okay. And that has significant implications as well. So the work requirements, specifically based on this PRWORA, is that these ABODs must work, participate in qualifying education or training activity, which could include SNAP employment and training programs. And this is the important thing, at least work 80 hours a month on average or 20 hours per week, right, to remain on SNAP benefits. Otherwise, they're limited to just 3 months of SNAP benefits within a 3-year period, any 3-year period, okay? It's quite controversial, as you might imagine, right? Because the question here is whether these work requirements really help in terms of their employment and labor outcomes. Another controversy is that, and this has been really probably the source of a lot of the debate about this work requirement, is that states do have access to different things in terms of waivers and exemptions. And this has really been, I guess, the motivation for the debate during the debt ceiling limit. I want to mention that I think the work requirement was changed, and I'm going to mention, I have a slide for this. The work requirement was changed through this debt ceiling limit regulation. I think they did that to make it easier, right, for the Farm Bill to go through, hopefully, by the end of the year. Because if they postpone this and do this debate and attach it to the Farm Bill, it will be much more contentious. I think that's why they did it with the debt ceiling. So the PRWORA was imposed in mid-90s, in 96. And then you have this ARRA, which was in 2009, which actually waived the work requirements for ABODs nationwide. As you might recall, the 2009 was the Great Recession, right? But then many states re-implemented the work requirements at different time periods. So it's great for us economists, right? Because we can then exploit these policy changes, if you will, if this is an interest to you. Okay? And this was beginning in 2011. Okay? States have, this is one source of controversy, is there's quite a bit of loopholes, if you will. States have actually requested waivers from the SNAP time limit in high unemployment areas in various time periods. Okay? So I want to talk about this Fiscal Responsibility Act, FRA, which is really the debt ceiling limits deal, right, that you all have heard about. So this was signed into law just last month. And the big thing is it expanded this work requirement age limit to 54, basically, right, from 49 to 54. CBO has estimated that these would effectively drop about 750,000 adults age 50 and 54 from SNAP. So that's a significant number, right? The other good news, they say, is that they expanded the nature of the exemptions. So it would include now veterans, youth aging out of foster care, so kids or adults 24 and less who have aged out of foster care by age 18. And then the big thing here is this all-age homeless people. So you're probably thinking, how do you define a homeless people? And how do you really monitor that, right? So that's the big question here, is how do you determine what is a homeless people and to what extent? And homeless people, from my understanding, doesn't just mean people living in streets without houses, right? It could be people living with somebody else for a certain period of time, I don't remember, maybe 18 months or so, but don't have a permanent residence, basically. Okay, so those can be considered under this homeless people definition. This is temporary. It will expire in 2030. But as you can imagine, this could potentially impact older low-income people, those 50 to 54. The FRA also is now requiring states or decreasing states' annual allotment of ABOD discretionary exemptions. So in the past, states were given a number of discretionary exemptions. I don't exactly remember the numbers, but now they're decreasing that allotment, and they're also limiting the state's ability to carry over these unused discretionary exemptions, if they do have some. And they would require USDA to make state waiver requests and agency approvals more transparent and available to the public. And as I've said, they did this in the debt ceiling, so they don't have to debate this under the Farm Bill, which I think is smart. So I want to talk about the summary of the paper, about the effect of SNAP work requirements. Xiaohan here is doing a systematic review of the papers on this, so I want to credit her on this. I know these are small, but this is just to show you that really there's really not much there out there, or economic papers that have examined the effect of these work requirements. Okay? But I want to summarize that these are some of the data sources they've used to estimate the effect of work requirements on different outcomes. So American Community Survey, a number of us have probably used that, CPS, FNS administrative data, but even Burfus, okay, they've used that as well. In terms of methods, diff and diff, two-way fixed effects, and really just to utilize the cross variation in the re-implementation of the work requirements that I've mentioned before. Another study have used event study to examine whether exposure of SNAP work requirements affected mental health care use. And then there's a few studies that have used triple differences comparing adults age 45 to 49, which was the older age limit, right, to those age 50 and 54, and also using 50 to 65 as additional control group. Another study used regression discontinuity, right, to examine participants, the effect of participants aging out of work requirements at age 50. So as I've mentioned, there's not many studies yet. I would have expected a lot more, actually. I think, Xiaohan, were there only like 26 or so that you found, right, in the literature? So not as much as I would have thought. So I think there's still room if this is an interest to you, okay? Especially with the FRA, the new regulations. So what are the impacts of these work requirements in terms of work-related outcomes? The bottom line here is the literature is really saying there's not much effect, right? In terms of employment status, work hours, probability of working, wage earnings, and so on, okay? But it's got significant effect on SNAP participation, as you might expect. So for SNAP-related outcomes, studies show that work requirements can significantly reduce SNAP participation and the probability of being on SNAP, okay? There's one or two studies that have also examined association. I think this wasn't a causal inference study on food security and also on physical mental health. So in summary, the work requirements, as I've said, do not seem to increase employment or earnings, but can have significant effect on SNAP participation and correlations with health and food security outcomes. ABODs who have higher food insecurity tend to be more likely affected by these work requirements, and the effect of work requirements tend to differ depending as well on the condition of the economy. And I want to emphasize the last part, that I think there's a lot of room for us economists, ag economists, to examine the effect of these new legislation related to the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Okay. So it's an exogenous policy change, if you will. Thank you.